Hey guys, how's it going? It's Since the Comic. We've got stories and so much more. If you're feeling sleepy, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos. Valentine for a Dragon by Shirley Rozier Murphy. Illustrated by Kay Correo. For Corey, Alicia, and Greg. Once in a time of wonders, a demon loved a dragon, but the dragon did not love him in return. She didn't know he existed. She was a fine dragon, immense and silvery. She lived in the mountain beyond the village. The demon was a shy, plain little fellow who lived in a cottage at the edge of the village and tried not to offend anyone. The dragon had breath like flaming volcanoes, so bright she could light up the whole countryside at night. Her voice was louder than 100 trombones and 1,000 kettle drums, so people covered their ears when she bellowed, and all the glasses on all the shelves in all the houses cracked into splinters. Her smoky breath left cinders hanging in the sky for days, spoiling everyone's laundry. The townspeople hated having a dragon so near. They complained of her fiery soot and of her thunder. They didn't like having a demon near either. They said he was too different, too small, too funny-looking, too strange to suit them, with his little spells for exotic cookery, which were the only spells he remembered properly from demon school, and his eccentric ways. They scowled at him when they passed him on the street, and they would not walk by his little house. They never invited him to parties. When he came into the shops, they would say, "There's that demon again. He oughtn't be allowed in the village. He oughtn't be allowed among real folk." When the demon heard their whispers, he would cry the rest of the day. "They are hateful," he would sob. Then, I don't care a whit about them." But he cared for the dragon. He loved her to distraction, longed for her night and day. If the dragon loved him, he knew he would not feel lonely. Still, he was far too bashful to go up the mountain to her den, too shy to ever speak to her. If only she knew I was alive. If only she could love me, I would be happy forever. She was so beautiful, so shiny silver, so broad of wing, such fiery breath, while he was dull and insignificant. The demon grew lonelier and more desperate, and as is sometimes the way with desperation, at last he had an idea. Oh, it would take courage, all the courage he could muster. He would give her a valentine. There were rows of them in the little shop, and tomorrow was Valentine's Day. He would find the most beautiful one and take it to the dragon, put aside his bashful shyness and present it to her. The boldness of the idea made him quiver, but with such a gift the dragon would surely love him. He took all his savings out of the sugar bowl. He bought a new suit of clothes to look presentable in, blue serge with a pale orange shirt and a fine necktie. Then he purchased the biggest, fanciest valentine the shop had to offer. It was covered with lace and red satin, the flowers and hearts and little birds. No dragon could resist it. He wrote across the front of it, in his best penmanship that he had learned at demon school, "To Vincent, the most wonderful dragon in the world." Early in the morning on Valentine's Day, he carried the valentine up the mountain to Vincent's cave, and he knocked, and he waited with shuffling feet. Vincent looked out. She was a marvelous dragon. She had teeth like Japanese swords, claws like scythes, and ears as warty as a hog's hide. She bent way down to look at the demon. She peered at him with one eye, then turned her head and peered with the other. Then she said with a voice as hot as if you'd open the oven door, "Well, what do you want, demon? I never in my life saw such a little tiny punny demon as you." The demon blushed with embarrassment. I I want I want to give. He held the Valentine out. He nearly fainted of shyness and of love for the wonderful dragon. He hiccuped once, then dropped the Valentine under her chin and fled. When he got to a safe distance where she could not see his blushes, he peered around a rock. Would she like his Valentine? Would she be impressed by it? The dragon watched the demon run away, and she didn't see the Valentine there beneath her chin. Now why, she said, little flames spurting out of the corners of her mouth, why was that demon knocking on my door? And of course when she spoke, her fiery breath burned the Valentine to cinders. When she glanced down at last and noticed the pile of ashes, she was quite puzzled. Now why in the world, she muttered, why would anyone bring me a pile of ashes? Does that demon think I have no ashes of my own? Why, my cave is full of ashes. The ashes of peasants, the ashes of oxen and knights, and even a king or two. What do I need with this little cloth full of fluff? The demon went home and cried for a long time for the end of his lovely Valentine and his failure with the dragon. Then he sat, wiping his tears and sniffling. Then he began to think, what kind of present can you give a dragon? Paper was surely no good. He could not give her picture postcards or writing paper. They would all burn up. He gazed out at the hillside where the first spring flowers were blooming. He could not give her a calendar or a book to read, or a box of tissues to wipe her smoky nose. Oh dear. Then suddenly he knew what he could give her, and he raced out onto the hills. He gathered a great armload of crocuses and jonquils and narcissus, and put a ribbon around them. He hied himself off to the dragon. He knocked on her door, then stood staring up at her, quite overcome again with love and shyness. I'd like to give. He gulped twice with embarrassment and self-consciousness, dropped the flowers under her chin, and fled. Then he stood watching from behind a rock as before. Vincent looked down to see what this was, and her breath scorched the poor flowers into a mass of brown, withered straw. Whatever is the matter with that fellow? Does he think I need a pile of straw? I would rather, she said softly and mournfully, I would rather have someone to talk to. It gets lonely being a dragon, especially on Valentine's Day. She snorted with unhappiness. Today is Valentine's Day, and I am all alone, and all that demon can think to do is bring me ashes and straw. The demon didn't hear her. He was crying too loudly. He went home depressed, sure his love would never be fulfilled. Everything he gave her ended up straw and ashes. After a while, though, he dried his tears and thought that maybe a little breakfast would make him feel better. He had no butter or eggs, so he dug his last few pennies out of the sugar bowl and went to the village shop. It was half full of people shopping for Valentine's Day. He heard someone whisper behind his back, "There's that demon! Did you see him running up the mountain this morning? What's he up to now?" Someone whispered back, "I saw him carrying flowers and the biggest Valentine in town up the mountain. There's nothing up there but that dragon. Surely the demon is quite mad." "He's peculiar, all right. Don't let anyone tell him about our Valentine party. We don't want him there." "Oh, I won't tell. We don't want that demon at the party." The demon heard the whispers, and he went home and cried about that. Then he finished crying at last. He began to make himself some pancakes, flour, butter, eggs, sugar, and when he opened the cupboard to reach for the sugar, he had an idea. Oh, a wonderful idea! Such an idea that he could hardly contain himself. He danced around the kitchen, then fetched down the sugar, then the chocolate, and began to mix and stir. He would make a present that would certainly delight the dragon, a present that could never turn into straw or to ashes. Surely the dragon would love rich chocolate fudge with walnuts. In Demon School he had been famous for his fudge with walnuts. He mixed and cooked and beat and by noon he had the loveliest batch of fudge any dragon had ever laid a lip over. He tied the plate with a ribbon and started off up the mountain as fast as his little legs would carry him. The demon knocked on the dragon's door, and now he was feeling bolder. When the dragon stuck her head out, he held the plate right up to her, and she bent to look. He shivered ever so slightly at the thrill of her closeness. She looked at the plate with one eye, then turned her head and looked with the other, then bent her head to sniff the wonderful smell. And of course her scorching breath melted the fudge into a stream of chocolate that ran right off the plate and all over the demon's new suit. The demon fled, stricken. His lovely fudge was ruined. His new suit was ruined, to say nothing of his orange shirt and fine tie. And worst of all, he had failed for the third time. Everyone knows that the third failure is the final ignoble failure. He trudged away home with tears pouring down to mix with the rivers of chocolate across his serge lapels. For Vincent stared after him. Then she bent and began to lap up the good hot chocolate with the little demon had left her. "But why?" she said, licking the plate clean, then licking her warty lips. "Why did he bring hot chocolate on a plate? Everyone knows hot chocolate is served in a mug." Meanwhile, poor demon sat on his doorstep and cried up such a storm that it could be heard all over town. People said, "What's the matter with that demon?" "I don't know. I don't have time to worry about him. I'm making favors for the party." "Well, I do wish he'd be still. He's going to spoil the whole party if he keeps that up. We won't be able to hear the music or enjoy ourselves at all. Why must he carry on so on Valentine's Day? Can't he wait till tomorrow?" And another said, "Sky is darkening to rain. That's probably the demon's fault, too." "He's a thoughtless, horrible little demon. It would be just like him to make it rain and spoil our party. I wish he were gone from here. I wish that demon were dead." Their voices were loud. They reached the poor demon easily, there on his front porch. Oh, this was the very last straw. Not only did the dragon not love him, but everyone else hated him too. He felt terrible. He felt so bad he decided he would do away with himself. "I'll get myself dead, just the way they like it. And then they'll be sorry. When it's too late, they'll be sorry, and that will serve them right." He sobbed and hiccuped. "I'll go up in the hills right now before it rains." The sky surely was beginning to darken. "I'll dig my grave up in the hills and carve my headstone saying, 'Here lies a demon dead because no one loved him.' And I'll get myself dead in the pouring rain, and then they'll be sorry." He took up a shovel and a chisel for carving his headstone, and started off towards the hills. When he got to a suitable hilltop, bare and lonely beneath the darkening sky, and just right for his grave, the demon began to dig. The clouds grew thicker and lower. The ground was rocky and hard, and seemed to grow harder. The shovel was dull and grew duller. Soon the demon was tired of digging. His back ached. His arms hurt. Did he really want to die of unrequited love in this empty place and lie here alone forever? He stopped digging and sat down on a stone to think. Pretty soon the wind turned to so chill he gathered twigs and built a little fire to warm himself. No sense dying cold and uncomfortable. A few drops of rain began to fall. He propped his shovel on a forked stick to protect the fire. The wind grew colder still, and the demon was getting hungry. No use to die hungry and wet. Soon all the glamour of dying had left him. He wondered why he had come up here. He picked up his shovel and his chisel and threw a handful of gravel on the fire to put it out. He would go home and have supper and be lonely where it was warm and comfortable. But what was this? The gravel didn't put the fire out. It made it blaze higher. The flames turned to bright blue, then to green. The demon stared, amazed. He threw on another handful of gravel. A green flame shot up. He found more gravel. threw it on, and watched blue flames burst forth as bright as jewels. He stood looking, puzzled and interested. Then at last he understood. Why, he had learned about this in demon school. He tried to remember the lesson. At last, and very slowly, he began to recall the spell. Find your rocks and pound them fine, and throw them on the flame. Copper for green, tellurium for blue. But he could remember no more. He stood looking at the gravel in his hand. There was a whole spell about how to make colors if he could only remember it. Why, he could make rainbows in the fire. But then he thought, what good would that do? He hadn't come up here to make fancy colors. How could that make the dragon love him, or the people in the village either? Still, he repeated the spell, pondering. Copper for green, tellurium for blue, and strontium for red. And then he began to have an idea. While the demon's idea was exploding in his mind, over on the mountain, the dragon had been awakened by the rain. She heard the pattering and came to her door to look. Then, peering out, she heard cries in the village below, and she slithered out farther to see what was going on. The rain felt good on her snout. She licked some up, then stretched out full length in the downpour, and stared down at the village below. She thought they must be having a party down there, with all the decorations. But why was everyone running about, dragging tables and chairs back inside the houses? Maybe people didn't like rain. Maybe it spoiled their party. She sat looking down longingly at the village. No one had invited her to a party. She saw red paper hearts hung from the trees. They were limp with rain. Had it been a Valentine's party? Oh, she wished she had been asked. She sat staring down forlornly, awash with loneliness. Then she thought, what would happen if she invited herself to the party? What would happen if she just crept down there quietly and asked to join in? She could hold her breath so flames would not spread on folks. She could not roar. She would ask in a whisper and politely. The dragon sat pondering this. Then she got up and started down the mountain, longing with all her heart to join the fun. Meanwhile, where was the demon? The little demon came down the hills through the rain, meaning to go right through the village and up the mountain to the dragon's den, with his wonderful new gift for Vincent. He was giddy with anticipation. He would give her the copper ore and the tellurium and some strontium too. He would show her how to make magnificent colored flames. He had removed his orange shirt and wrapped quantities of the gravel up in it. Oh, this gift would not turn to ash or straw, or melt and run all over him. But in the village, his progress was hindered by folk running this way and that, dragging party decorations out of the rain, by women running indoors with cakes and bunting flags, as the rain pelted down, soaking the tablecloths and covered streamers and washing away food. The voices of the townsfolk were distraught. Save the cookies! Rescue the sandwiches! The lemonade is running over the pitcher! The hearts on the bandstand were bleeding red dye. A little girl's dress had shrunk up around her armpits, and limp dollies were floating in the gutter. The band has gone home. Oh, the party is ruined! And then someone saw the dragon. The dragon is coming! The dragon! Run! Save my child! Hide in the cellar! For Vincent slid quietly down the mountain and into the village. Those folk who had not escaped, stood frozen with fear at her approach. Only the demon was not afraid. He stood wondering, why was the dragon coming here? What did she mean to do? Had the unkindness of the village maddened her at last? Did she mean to destroy the village while folk were too distraught and confused to defend themselves? The demon thought she did. He took heart and grew braver and cheered her. On dragon! On dragon! Wipe the village flat! The dragon came closer. The few remaining folk disappeared into doorways. The street stood empty except for soggy party tables, wet cakes, and fading flags. The rain drizzled dishearteningly. The dragon stopped in the center of the village. Her scales were shiny wet. She was woozy from holding her breath so as not to breathe flame on the townsfolk. Everyone had fled except the little demon, there in the middle of the street. She felt better knowing someone was not afraid of her, felt warm inside. She saw the ruins of the party, saw the soggy mess the rain had made, saw folk peering out fearfully through their windows. She knew what she would do. For Vincent reared to her full height above the village. She reared taller than the trees, far taller than the church steeple. She opened her mouth wide enough to swallow a house. She breathed out a flame of fire so huge it covered the sky. A canopy of flame hung above the village, whipping in the wind. Rain hissed down onto the flames and disappeared into steam. No raindrop fell, now onto tables and cakes. Village turned as warm and bright as summer beneath her fiery breath. The cakes began to dry, though their icing melted. The paper plates dried, slightly singed. The flowers and the bunting tablecloths dried. The rain pattered all around on the hills, but did not touch the village. For Vincent, hot breath licked across the sky as for Vincent reared towering, and soon everything beneath her was warm and dry. Folk began to come out. They dried themselves in her warmth. The demon cut a slice of cake and took up a sandwich and smiled shyly up at the dragon. The orchestra came out, holding their trombones and zithers up to the heat so Vincent could dry them. The children came, basking in her warmth, staring up at her flame as one could stare at a wonderful sunset. They cut cake and took sandwiches and poured out hot lemonade that tasted different and new. The party became happy with music and eating and drinking and merriment and the dancing of reels and logs. And for Vincent kept back the rain with her flames until at last the rain clouds, disheartened, drifted away. It was then the demon stepped close to the dragon, though still his shyness made him tongue-tied. He held out his shirt made into a package, then poured from it onto the ground a little pile of copper ore, a little pile of tellurium, and one of strontium. For Vincent glanced down, then looked at the demon, puzzled anew. What now? What strange present was this? First ashes, then straw, then hot chocolate on a plate, and now what was this? Piles of rocks? All around them the village folk had stopped dancing and singing to watch. What was the demon up to now? At last the demon found his tongue. Breathe on them, he whispered. Blow flame on them. It's a gift. The dragon cocked her head and stared with one eye at the little piles of gravel. Breathe, urged the demon more boldly. She breathed out a small lick of flame into the copper ore. The ore flared up bright blue, beautiful as butterflies. The dragon stared in amazement. Then she breathed again, a fiery sigh onto the tellurium. Flame shot up green as emeralds. The dragon gaped, then smiled with delight. Never in all her life had her breath been so beautiful, like flowers and rare jewels. She breathed again, and again the colors flared. Again! She smiled. Again. Flames danced, cerulean and turquoise and azure. She breathed on the strontium, and the flames danced red. Again and again, until at last the little piles of ore were all used up. Have more, whispered the demon, showing her his tied-up shirt. I can get more and more, all you will ever want. The dragon knelt. She kissed the demon on the forehead. He was a wonderful small demon. She took him on her back very gently, lifting him in her sword-sharp teeth just in the center of his collar. Together they joined the party. The demon and the dragon together stuffed on cake and hot lemonade and sandwiches until nightfall. And then the dragon made fireworks for the party. She coughed up cascades of blue and red and green and turquoise fire in the shapes of hearts and birds and all the wonders of a summer meadow. She delighted the children and made their parents smile with awe. And when the party was ended, the dragon and the demon went away to make a new life. They lived for hundreds of years, and never more were they parted. They took slithering gallops across the stony mountains. They were always warm in the dragon's bright flame, always well fed with the demon's cooking that he had learned in demon school. And every Valentine's Day the dragon made hearts of fire, red fire and blue, written on the sky to show her affection for the demon. And the demon made fudge for her and brought her flowers and valentines. She never scorched one again, not ever. And neither of them was again ever lonely. And in the village for hundreds of years, folk loved dragons, and they loved demons, and they let each creature live as it chose. The end.